Well, everybody, welcome to the seminar on developing an effective sales process. I want to thank Andy Snook, our presenter, for joining us today. I look forward to a great call. Again, for those of you just joining, if you could mute your microphones, turn off your video to save bandwidth, and please open the chat window. So with that, Andy, I'm going to turn it over to you. You should now have co-host access.
I certainly do. Thanks, Mike. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Andy Snook. I am the CEO at FastPath. We are a software company based out of Urbandale, Iowa. And a couple weeks ago, we've done a couple sessions about remote selling. And one of the things I talked about a lot during our remote selling presentation and meeting was talking about a sales process. And then we had a lot of requests. I'm back by request, I guess, right, Mike? That a lot of requests to understand what is a sales process, how do you build a sales process, how can that help as you go through. So that's what we're here to do today. And as Mike mentioned, I'll try to do my best to take questions as we go through. It is an interactive session, so just let me know. And Mike, if you can interrupt me when I go through, if people have chat questions, that's much appreciated. So a little bit about what we're going to talk about is what's a methodology, what's a sales methodology versus a sales process, because they are two different things. We'll talk about why they're important as you go through. We'll talk about some benefits and uses of both the methodology and the sales process. And then we'll talk about how to build yours, right? So how can you go through a team? And this is something, I know everybody's busy right now. It's been kind of a unique situation for several reasons. But we on our team find these odd gaps of times, some days where we have time to kind of sharpen the saw on certain things and really look at how we could be doing things better. And this is an opportunity, maybe that you can use to build a process. And also as you're kind of, potentially there are people reinventing the way that they have to go to market right now. And if you're reinventing that, that means you're building a new process. And the more formalized you do that today, the more benefit it's going to have down the line. So then you can start to compare the old way we did things, kind of the process that's going to be in place during kind of this interim time. And then, when we get our new normal, whenever that may be, how to adapt your processes from there. So again, if anybody has any questions at any time, just feel free to interrupt me or throw those into the chat. So the first thing that you have to pick before you even come up with a sales process is what is going to be your sales methodology. And what I mean by that is it's more of a methodology is kind of more of a framework, guideline, principles, your approach to doing sales. What are you how are you going to approach your prospects? What is kind of your theory about doing that? Are you trying to demonstrate your so we're a software company. So a lot of time I just fail to my own expertise and my own experience. So we're a software company. So we have lots of different ways we could sell our software. Do you do trials? Do you want to make sure that trials first, let people try the software and then ultimately hope they buy it based on using it? Do you try to talk to people about try to discover what their main problem is and demonstrate what how you can solve that problem for them? How are you going to try to convince a prospect to buy your product? What's your methodology around that? And there are a lot of sales methodologies available. There are probably about 12 to 15 widely accepted sales methodologies, and you can go buy volumes on volumes of books and literature on sales methodologies and how they work. Once you pick a sales so I listed a couple there. There's a challenger sales methodology, which is you're really trying to lead and educate your prospects. There's the inbound sales methodology, which is kind of a newer sales methodology since you're talking about how educated your prospects are before they even reach you because of the internet. They've done a lot of the research and everything else by the time they get to you. There's a solution selling methodology, which is actually what FastPath uses. We use a combination of a lot of different methodologies, but primarily ours is based on a solution selling, where what we try to do is demonstrate how we solve a prospect's problems. We want to discover what their problems are and then demonstrate how our solution can address their problem. So we're not really even selling where we're selling a solution to their problem, right? And then I threw some other fun acronyms out there that you can go out and research. And again, a lot of it is once you build that sales methodology or pick one, it's continuing to kind of hone that. You don't have to just, one way to do it is to pick up a book, read the book and say, yep, that's the one I want. And then you go from or the other way to do it is analyze your team and figure out what they're best at. Are they best at challenging the customer? Do you have a lot of salespeople that are really good at teaching and educating? Do you have most of your prospects come inbound and they already know what they want before they get to you? And so you might want to adopt that sales strategy. So or sales methodology. So some of it becomes, what market are you in? What are you trying to sell? What does your prospect look like? What does your sales cycle look like? A lot of your methodology can be driven by those factors instead of, hey, I'm just going to go pick a book off the shelf because I've got time right now to read. I'm going to go pick one thing, read it, and decide that's for me. So again, there's probably another follow-up session here just to get into sales methodology and how do you pick one. But once you do pick a methodology, it really guides the types of salespeople that you're going to want on your team. If you're trying to do solution selling in a challenger methodology, you need very seasoned, very intelligent, industry expert salespeople. Now, does your business model support hiring, paying, compensating those types of individuals? Where if you're doing inbound selling, you might not have to have as much expertise on your sales staff. Because a lot of the people that are coming to you are already very educated about that. So depending, for us, we have to have our sales team is very knowledgeable about software. They're very knowledgeable about auditing, but those people with those skill sets are incredibly difficult to find. And as everybody knows, if it's difficult to find, the scarcer the resource, the more expensive it is. So it either takes a really long time to train them or it's expensive to go find them. Is your business and your business model set up to be able to handle that? So some of it is you have to understand that when you pick a methodology, it's going to drive the type of people in the organization that you're going to build, and therefore your business plan better be able to support the type of people you need. So what you need to start to think about is, what are you trying to sell? Who is the customer? Who's your ideal customer? Who's your prospect? And then who is on your team? And so part of this comes down to the philosophy, plus the players you have, plus the plays you're going to call. So, last week, one of the greatest things that's happened is the NFL draft, because it gave us all something to do for a while. But to me, a sales methodology is, what kind of a football team? And I apologize if you don't like sports for several reasons, but I'd use a lot of sports analogies. And this is one of the best analogies I can think of, is that if you think about a football team, you have to think, what kind of a football team are we going to be? Are we going to be the Kansas City Chiefs that want to score 50 points a game, throw it all over the yard? We'll give up 40 points, but if we score 50 points, we still win the game. It's going to be exciting. It's going to be fun to watch. It's going to be great. Or do we want to be the team that's built on defense, that's going to run the ball, that's going to, try to score? If we kick a field goal, we're going to win 3-0, and we're okay with that. Now, if that's your methodology, our methodology is, we're going to be tough. We're not going to give up any points. We're going to be defensive minded. That's what we're going to do. That's your methodology. And then in order to do that, when you go through the draft, once you pick, that's the kind of team I want to be, then you're going to want to pick the players that match that philosophy or that methodology. So you start to think of, if you go back and look at the Carolina Panthers draft, I think they ended up drafting like 7 or 8 or maybe more than that on defense. They're going to build their team. They have a new coach. They're going to build that team around defense, it looks like. And so that was their methodology. So they went out to get the players to match their methodology. Now, the plays that you start to run to be successful, that's where you start to get into a process. That's where you start to say, okay, well, what plays do we need to run to be successful with this? If we need to score 50 points a game, these are the guys that we need. These are the people that we need in order to score 50 points a game. Well, what are the plays that we can put them into so that they're successful? So the plays are really your sales process, where your methodology, your philosophy, that's more of kind of your strategy of, are we a run first team defense, wide open, what are we going to be? and then the players sit in the middle of that. So your players would either be linebackers or salespeople, right? So that's kind of how I look at the difference, or kind of that mesh point between a methodology and the play in the process. And so a little bit is, you want to understand your methodology before you start running the plays, because you don't want to go draft a quarterback that can't throw the ball if you're hoping to throw the ball 50 yards down the field on every play, right? It doesn't make any sense. Or if you end up with a quarterback that can't throw the ball because of injury or whatever, you have to be able to modify those plays to make sure they work well. So again, try to understand, what are you trying to sell? Who's your prospect? Who's your ideal customer? And then who's on your team? And so a little bit of it is, how can I make our current organization successful? What process is going to, and methodology will help what I currently have. And then there's future state to say, okay, well, I can win right now. I've got a running quarterback, but someday we're going to want to change. We're going to hire a bunch of other people that can throw and catch the ball. So you can have a current state process and then a future state, and start to like build around who you are today and then what you want to be in the future. So what's a process? There's your process right there. First pants, then your shoes. So during our little stay-at-home thing, I've gone back to reading my Far Side comics, and so I thought this was an appropriate, the most simple process that you could find. That this guy was having trouble figuring out. It was taking him a long time to get dressed every morning, so he said, you know what? I can figure this out. I'll just write it down. I'll write down my process. So a process is really a representation, or your set of roles, steps, decisions, systems that lead to an outcome. So a lot of people think of a process, they leave some of those things out. They'll have steps, right? These are the 5 things I need to do. And one of the, I do this session a lot. I've taught this session for a long time, and it's actually a workshop where we go through, in the end, and actually build out a sales process. And I wish we could get together and do that right now, because we usually end up drinking beer or whiskey afterwards, which is a lot more fun than hanging out by myself. But anyway, one of the things we do as an example is, how do you get ready to go to work in the morning? What's your process to get yourself ready to go to work, right? So for me, do I shave my head before I get in the shower, or do I shave my head after I get in the shower? Or do I shave my head while I'm in the shower? When do I brush my teeth? Do I brush my teeth before breakfast, after breakfast, before and after breakfast? So there are all these decisions you have to make. There is a definitive process, and everybody has a process. You just may not have written it down. And so a lot of people think of that, where we start with that, as just the steps. What are the steps that have to happen? Now, when you start talking about a business, you start introducing other items. There are other people involved in that, right? And maybe when you're getting yourself ready in the morning, you start thinking about, well, I've got to let the dog out. So the dog is a different role, right? When you start talking about business, not only are we talking about the salesperson, we're talking about a prospect. So who are all the roles? Who are all the people, individuals involved in that? It's not just the steps. And then the other thing is, it's the technology that's involved, right? So what are the pieces of technology that I have to use? I have a razor, and I have my beard trimmer, and I've got to use the microwave, and I've got to use the stove. And in business, it's what systems do I use in my sales process? I use HubSpot. I look up things on LinkedIn. I have Salesforce. I've got my CRM tools. I've got the phone. I've got all these different systems. So really, to build a business process, you don't want to just you can start off thinking about the steps, but really challenge yourself and your team to think about, who are all the people that are involved, what are all the steps involved, and what are all the systems involved? Because if you don't think about systems, you're going to miss capturing data. You're going to miss some of the other things, the nuances that happen. And obviously, systems are a key part of any business anymore, says the guy that sells enterprise software. So just remember that. And then the other thing you're doing with the process map is you're standardizing how things are done at a company. And I don't have it in this one, but I actually have a copy of the process flow that Maker's Mark has for making Maker's Mark whiskey. And it goes through the entire process. Well, the reason they documented the process is because it's important to them. It is critical to Maker's Mark that they do it the exact same way every time. They need the quality control that Maker's Mark always tastes as fantastic as it does, right? So they wanted to make sure that they could standardize it to get the same result every time. So one of the advantages of building a process map is you have quality control, and you can also scale. So what might work for one of your salespeople, or what's being successful when you're a small company, right? When I was the only salesperson at FastPath, I could do pretty much whatever I wanted, right? But if I tried to scale that team, and when we did scale the team, my process may not completely work for everybody else, or me trying to walk everybody through and verbalize that to people was very difficult to teach them. So we had to document what I knew in order to make it consistent, and then also to make it scalable so we could hire 5 salespeople at a time instead of me trying to train each one of them at a time. Right. So that's what the process map is for. It's going to help you standardize it, quality control, and it's going to help you scale. And it also helps you kind of, when you go through a post-mortem, is you can say, where did we fall down in the sales process? Oh, we didn't do a discovery call on that one. Oh, we didn't do a demo on that one. Oh, this happened. Or as you're trying to manage your team, you can start to say, hey, why am I not seeing? You have to go through every step in the sales process in order to qualify for your commission. If you don't put information into the CRM system, right? To me, that is a sales leader. One of the hardest things to do is get your salespeople to put data into the CRM system so you actually have a clear picture of pipeline and everything else. That's why you have the system in that process map, is to make sure at this point in the process, I need this data in the system. And if you don't do that, you're not going to get paid commission on this deal until everything's done. So again, this is one thing, the key thing that I've always challenged all of our clients, all of our customers. And I've also challenged FastPath internally, that we have process maps. Again, this doesn't just have to be related to sales, right? This could be about billing. It could be month-end close. There's so many other things in your business that you can build process maps for that are going to help automate and scale your business much more. And then when you actually do implement software, it's a lot easier to do that, because most software these days is built on top with the idea that you have a sales process or a business process in mind. So why is process mapping important? A picture is worth 1,000 words. I cannot explain to everybody on this call how I used to do sales by myself, but I can take our sales process map and show it to you, and somebody should be able to sit and look at it and figure it out in about a half an hour on their own. And so it's much easier to teach people and to enforce what you're trying to do as a process if you can see it. So I work in the auditing industry. So they used to have these things called audit narratives. Well, they still have them. And a narrative is like a Word document that you type up. What does your month-end process close look like? And what are all the controls? Who's involved? Why do you do that? What steps are you taking? And it's a narrative, right? It's like reading the world's most boring story over and over again. Well, auditing has shifted a little bit, and instead of wanting the narratives, they want to see the process flow, because the process flow, it's easier for a staff auditor to come in and say, okay, these are all the steps that you go through when you do a software release, right? Who's the person that's releasing the code? Who's approving it? Or they can see the giant gap in your process that says, wait a minute, the same person that wrote the source code is releasing it. Where's your approval step here? I don't see an approval step. Well, that immediately raises a red flag to the auditors, and it's very easy to see it on the process map. The other thing it does is you'll have increased productivity. So the more you can say, you can get through a lot more sales calls if people know what process. If they can focus on their steps in the process, they're going to be able to figure out what they're supposed to do. They'll know their role. They'll understand the requirements of their role much better than, if you have issues that say, how come this salesperson is getting involved in redlining terms and conditions of contracts? That's not part of their process. That should have been handed off to sales leadership. Why do we have that salesperson doing that? They didn't know they weren't supposed to be doing that. They had the sales process in front of them, so you avoid churn or people doing work that they're not supposed to be doing, and they're able to focus more on the things that they are supposed to be doing, so you don't have people wandering off. It just decreases waste and confusion. Again, that's kind of the same point. Increasing productivity is the same thing to me is decreasing the waste and churn. So again, you get people focused on the right things. And it's, hey, if you have extra time, work on improving our process. Stay in your lane, right? Don't go off and try to help somebody else in legal or accounting or somewhere else. Just build a better process or do more of what you're supposed to be doing instead of creating churn somewhere else. And that's a big thing, is identifying the areas of improvement. Because one of the challenges I see when you develop a sales process is management thinks one process is happening, but the people that are actually executing the process are doing something completely different than what management thinks. And so a lot of times the people that are going to have the best ideas for improving something are the people that are on the ground level doing it on a day-to-day basis. Hey, why are we still emailing people? Nobody respond to that. None of our prospects are responding to my emails at all, but they really started responding again for some reason to my reach outs on Zoom or my reach outs on the phone. So again, you can find those places to improve the process as you're going through it. And especially if you're first developing the process, don't expect this to be a set it and forget it. Every process, every methodology is an evolving thing. There's no one size fits all. There's no, hey, if that's what FastPath's doing and I want to be a software company, we should just do what they do. That would be a launch point, but there's so many other variables and things change so quickly just right now. What's your area of improvement as we're going through social distancing and staying at home? If you have the process map built and you can see it, you can start moving things around and then educating those areas of improvement very quickly. And then the last thing is identify your risks. And so a story, I'll have to be a little careful here how I tell this story, is we had a customer a while ago. This would have been probably close to 20 years ago. We had a customer and we were doing this process. It was an order to cash process. So how do you go from the customer saying, yes, I want to buy this, to receiving the money for that customer? And we had everybody in the room. We had the IT department, we had finance, we had the sales team. Everybody was in the room. And as we were going through, somebody said, yep. And then the customer sends us their credit card and we place their credit card order. And one of the IT people raised their hand and said, you know what? I also saved that credit card number in this Access database. You do what? He's like, oh yeah. And he was a young kid and he thought he was being helpful. He thought that, hey, if we save their credit card information, then this was, as I said, about 20 years ago. So this was like a new thing. He's like, yeah, if we save their credit card information, it's much faster for us to process their credit card. And then they don't have to type it into the website every time. It's just way easier. And everybody in the room had no idea this was going on. And now, everybody's probably aware and can understand the risk that was there. But back then, he just thought it was a great deal. It's like, so there's an Access database somewhere at this company that has all of our customers' names, addresses, credit card information. And we would have had no idea that that was going on unless we were all in the room going through the process flow. He had a great idea for a feature, but it was just not really deployed all that well. So walking through that process really highlighted a risk that they had as an organization. Or back to the code release, that the same person that's writing the code is releasing that's a huge risk. So being able to walk through those processes are going to help you find those risks as you go through any business process, not just the sales process. So this is, you guys can tell I like cartoons. This is the risk of not using a process, right? This is not a straight line looks like a great day for Billy, right? Because as a little kid, this is a fun afternoon. I hope our kids are out there doing this right now, outside on a wonderful day. Go out and find a bunch of things to do. However, I hope our salespeople aren't doing this right now, because if this is that confusing for Billy, or I don't know, is that Billy or Jeffy? Somebody have to chat in and correct me for one of the kids. If it's this confusing for him to go through this, it's going to be confusing for a salesperson. And more importantly, it's going to be extremely confusing for your prospect or customer, right? If you have no sales process and and you're just kind of bumbling your way through it, one, it's inefficient for you as a company. Two, it's inefficient for the salesperson. You can't replicate it. You can't scale it. But on the other side is the buyer doesn't understand how to go through your sales process. And when buyers can understand where they're at in a sales process, you really increase your chances of closing that sale, or you increase the chance of that sale maybe going away, that you don't win. But to me, one of the biggest things is, obviously I like to win every deal, but the sooner you can get to a no, the better, because you can start a sales process with somebody that might say yes. And so again, this is kind of put up there as a joke, but understand that you're taking your prospect along for this winding, bumpy ride, and it's just extremely inefficient, right? So when you go through a process mapping workshop, right, how can I, hopefully by now I've convinced everybody why you want to have a sales process in place. So what you need to do is sit down and identify, the first thing I would challenge everybody to do is you have a sales process, right? Everybody does. You just may not have formalized it, you haven't written it down, but you have one. And the first thing I would challenge everybody to do is understand what your current process looks like. And so you sit down and we're going to map that out as a current process, as opposed to sitting down wishing what your process is going to look like. And the reason that I always like to start with the current state is you learn more about your company and your people and the risks in your process by mapping the current state. And then what you do is map your future state, your vision after that. Because the other thing that gets to be a challenge, if you start with vision and future state and all that kind of stuff, is you might forget things that you have, right? So if you don't take an inventory of all the things that you're doing currently and you build your wish list future state, it's like, wait, this is a critical thing that we're doing. We have to do this, and you whiff on it. So part of doing the current state, know thyself, understand how you're doing it. So the first thing you want to do is bring your team together. And I would challenge everybody is don't just include salespeople. Like, make sure that every part of anybody that touches a customer, a prospect, is involved in this process. And you can break up the sales process into different chunks, right? There could be, like, for us, we have when somebody goes from a lead to an opportunity, that's one piece of our sales process. Who's involved in that? That might be our BDR team, like our business development rep team and our marketing team. But because I want to make sure that our salespeople are there, our customer success people are there, potentially finance is there, anybody that can be involved in the broad process should be in the room. At least one representative from each team should be in that room to go through and describe what happens during the process. Because again, a lot of people have their heads down. They don't realize what else is going on. And so they don't know to either challenge what the current state is, ask questions about it, or they don't know that, hey, I know that every time a marketing lead comes in, man, I didn't know that the BDR team was doing that. If I would have known that, I could have done all these other things for them. I didn't realize that every time you went out to look for a lead, you went to LinkedIn to look up all their contact information. We could have been pulling that straight into HubSpot, and you wouldn't have had to do all that manual labor. So again, having people from each team is important. One other place that I see people fall down, and I mentioned it before, is bringing in strategic management and not the ground level tactical team that's doing this every day. So the challenge starts to become you end up with a wish list. This is how I think it works, because management always thinks that way. But then the reality is this is actually what people are doing on a daily basis, right? So it's important to have some management there, have some leaders there, but also making sure that the people that do it on a daily basis are in that room so they can really tell you what's going on. The other thing is set a scope. Agree on which process or which part of the process that you want to map. And again, you don't have to do the whole thing. If you try to go from lead all the way to sales close in an hour, it's not going to happen, right? So pick one piece of the process that maybe you're struggling with. Maybe you think you could be doing better. Maybe right now you want to be talking about, hey, we're not going to be going to trade shows this year. We need to be talking about how to get from lead to opportunity without trade shows. How is that changing for us, right? So again, you can break a process down into sub processes and then agree on a scope, because if you don't agree to that scope, you're going to creep all over the place in that process. And so the biggest advantage is having, and I'll talk about it in a second, is somebody, once you pick a scope, pick somebody to facilitate that conversation and rein in the conversation just to that piece, so you don't end up going off on tangents and down rabbit holes. So agree to the scope at the beginning, and then also start talking about, when you do start to see the tangents, start talking about, maybe that's one we can talk about next week, next meeting. Let's talk about that branch of this process. Agree on the purpose of the process. At the start of the meeting, make sure that you talk about, this is current state. We're not talking about current state and future state right now. Or if you want to talk about both in the same meeting, you can do that. Just make sure that everybody's on the same page as you go through it. Because otherwise you're going to get people that are talking about what they wish to happen, what they think might happen. And it's like, we're all agreed to the fact that we're talking about what's actually going on, current state, that's it. And again, facilitating that discussion is going to mean efficiency in the meeting and actually coming up with a better, true process as you go through. And then the other thing is agree on the level of detail to be displayed. And what I mean there is, like, if you're say, hey, as soon as a lead comes across from our website, we're entering that data into our CRM tool. Well, maybe that's enough, right? Maybe you're just saying data goes into the CRM application, it goes into Salesforce, right? Or do you want to drill all the way down into what data elements do we need inside of Salesforce to actually say that's a lead? So the first time you go through this, it's an iterative process. The first time you go through, maybe all you want to say is, that's where we put the lead into Salesforce. And then when you come back around, you can say, now what are actually the data elements? Let's get really specific on what needs to be inside of Salesforce at that point in the process, right? So that, again, agreeing on those levels of details at the beginning, otherwise you're going to have scope creep, and you can spend the better part of a day just talking about, do we really need a SIC code on our prospects? Do we want to make sure that we have the fax number for our prospects, and it'll just take forever going through a meeting when you're really just trying to hit the big rocks of the current state? So again, agree to that at the beginning of the meetings. And then you can start by preparing a narrative outline of the steps, right? So whoever's the sales lead or whoever, just get a small group together and say, this is kind of how I've sketched out what I think is going on, but now we want to take a deeper dive into the actual steps. So having that narrative can be a nice launch point for the conversation for everybody, again, to put up some guardrails. If you're working on a team that's never gone through this before, your biggest risk is going to be scope creep, that everybody's going to want to dive into too much detail. So again, kind of putting up some guardrails, that narrative can kind of provide those for you as a sales leader to say, this is what I think is going on, and I want to confirm that. That said, you want to be very, very careful as a leader, because if you say, this is what I think is going on, and you have subordinates in that conversation, sometimes they'll just say, yep, that's what's happening. You won't get honest feedback from them because they're worried it's a performance review. So you have to be a little bit careful of giving them too much, right? It's this delicate art, not a science, because you don't want to just have an echo chamber of whatever I say as a leader and as a manager. You're just going to say, yes, that's what we do, because maybe that's not what's going on, and there's inefficiencies that you're not going to find. And then identify some other people that are involved in the process that can sit kind of as an outside observer. So if you're working on your sales process, maybe invite somebody in from the finance team. Maybe invite somebody in that's a developer that is like maybe a pre-sales engineer, whatever it may be. Invite somebody in to kind of help you facilitate the meeting, take notes, challenge notions, but they're not really a participant, so to speak. They are, but they're more of an observer, and they can either, and a lot of times, you can go pay a lot of big companies a lot of money to come in and have a professional process map design and facilitation and all this other stuff. But if you're trying to do this as a team that doesn't have this expertise, what you really want is a caddy, right? They're not going to be swinging the club. They're not playing, but they're helping you kind of understand what's going on. They kind of are an outside observer, and that person is critical, because if you are a key team member in the process, it's hard for you to have that independence. It's hard for you to be able to maintain objectivity as you're going through the way you think things do work, the way they should work, et cetera. So try to find some other people that know your business pretty well, and that can help out with that. So let's see. So the other thing is, like I said, a couple of key things is include managers and transaction level employees. Invite business process owners from related areas, because again, like one of the biggest challenges we have with our process is what we call those mesh points. So it's where the handoff happens between marketing and the BDRs, and where anytime you're handing exchange like roles, data or process changes from one team to the other, that's where you can get a lot of inefficiencies. You get a lot of overlap. You get a lot of kind of frustration with other teams. Sometimes it's like, man, I wish you would put the data in that you were supposed to. Well, I always thought you were supposed to put that in. Isn't that the marketing team's job? Like, again, if you get everybody in the same room, it's amazing how much everybody will say, oh yeah, I can do that. I can automate that. Oh, that would be great. And they actually collaborate together. So making sure that don't separate them out, make sure that they're all working together, that you have those mesh point conversations. Assign a facilitator and a scribe for the meeting. Again, that's the caddy conversation. Even if, again, you can go out and pay a consultant to come in and help you do this. There are other people, I have a broader deck that I can send to people that kind of walks you through how to do that. But again, if you are part of the sales process, you are a participant in the meeting, not a facilitator of the meeting. You can't facilitate your own business process design. It doesn't work. And so the other thing is, ideally, you'd have a facilitator that's going to help you manage scope, manage the conversation, drive the conversation, and then you're going to have a scribe that's going to be writing everything down. Ideally, those are two separate people. A lot of times, just because of resource constraints, whatnot, they end up being the same person, and that's okay. But what you don't want is your VP of sales to be the facilitator and the scribe. It just doesn't work. So again, pick a business process owner or somebody from outside of the process that you're working on. That's the ideal way to do it. And again, before you start any of this, make clear what the scope is. Agree on the level of detail that you're going to display on this iteration, because otherwise it makes the facilitating the meeting impossible. And if you've gone through this before, you know that people can get wrapped around the axle on one thing of, I don't know, why are we tracking fax number? Nobody asks faxes anymore. Why is that even there? And then you get into this like debate on, philosophical debate on fax machines. It's like, what are we really trying to solve here, guys? So you start to lose focus. So again, it'll really help. Agreeing to the scope of the meeting will help you understand or help facilitate the meeting. And again, coach everybody that you're going through that this isn't a one and done scenario. Right? We're going to continue to iterate through this, and it's a living, breathing thing. I mean, our sales process at FastPath changes all the time, and we have to go back through and document it and prove it. And, just like I doubt the plays that the Kansas City Chiefs were running to win the Super Bowl this year were the same plays that they were running, 20 years ago when Joe Montana was the quarterback, right? It evolves, it changes. I mean, football doesn't look anything the same, anything like what it did 25, 30 years ago. Right? So it evolves, it changes. They're all still trying to do the same thing. They're all trying to close sales. They're all trying to close touchdown or score touchdowns, but the way they do it is different. So again, try to figure that out and let everybody in on it. Don't keep it as a secret. What are we trying to do today? What level of detail are we going to try to get to on this version? So what I like to use are swim lane diagrams when you're talking about, and I'll show you an example here in a second. So if you look at the French swimmer, the Brazilian swimmer, these are all roles. I'll have to go through I think that's Australia, the United States, fairly certain that's Canada. I think that's the Netherlands potentially. Anyway, each one of the swimmers in a lane is going to be a role or a system in your business process map. And so this is a linear process where it's going to go from left to right. So this is the schoolhouse rock, how Bill becomes a law. So the French swimmer might be your marketing team, and the Brazilian swimmer might be your BDR, and the Australian swimmer might be your, is that Puerto Rico? Anyway, Australian swimmer might be your account executive. And then the American swimmer might be your lawyer because you have to do T's and C's. And then down here at the bottom, the Canadian and the Dutch swimmer, those are your CRM system, LinkedIn, your financial system where the order resides. So as you go across, you're going to follow that whole role and everything across. It's all in one diagram. That's why it's called a swim lane diagram. So when you're building your process map, and again, this is available to everybody if you've never done this before, a role is a rectangle. So you're going to say marketing team, and maybe you're going to split that out, and it's not going to be the marketing team, and it's going to be our digital marketing coordinator or our trade show marketing team or whatever it might be. That's the role. Who's doing it? An activity is the step. What do they do, right? So the marketing team sends out a, whatever it may be. We have a webinar. Marketing team hosts a webinar. And then as people sign up for that webinar, did the people ask for follow-up? If the answer is yes, then that follow-up information gets tracked in our CRM tool, and the BDR is going to, then you have another role called BDR, and the BDR would actually follow up on that information. And then the system down at the bottom is different than a role. So a role is a person or a team, an activity is the step, diamond's the decision, and then the cylinder is the system where the data gets tracked, or the system where information's being pulled from. So like in our sales process diagram, we have HubSpot, we have DiscoverOrg, we have LinkedIn, we have NetSuite, we have our own platform that we use for the reg keys, and are people turned on, or they turned off? How is all of that's working? So these are all the shapes that you're going to use. And then most people use Visio. You don't have to use Visio. There are other tools out there. There's freeware you can use. There's other ways people do it in PowerPoint, whatever. I always use Visio. I used to do this so much that I used to dream in Visio diagrams. I'm not a Microsoft salesperson, but Visio really has a lot of easy ways to do this, and it makes it really easy to modify and share down the line. So that's one of the tools that I like to use. I'm sure a lot of other people have ideas on some of the other tools. There's freeware out there. But this is in the end what you want. So here I have a customer, I have a salesperson, I have our order processing team, our customer support team, our AR department, financial systems team, management team, collections, Microsoft Dynamics, order admin, order processing, and a CRM. So honestly, guys, this, I won't tell you who it is, and you might be, some of you will be able to figure it out, but this is the order process from 1999 or 2000, from a company, a software company that's based in Urbandale. And I did this process map with them. So the customer and this is why we were building their website. So the customer places an order. Did this order, did they call in, or did this come across the website? No, it didn't come across from the website. So we're still gonna be taking orders. The salesperson has to enter the order form and attach the contract information into CRM. So all that data has to go into CRM. If they don't do that, right? And this isn't on this diagram, but if they didn't enter that data into CRM, the next rev of this would say, the next decision is the data in CRM? If it was no, then the salesperson wouldn't get their commission. If they did enter it into CRM before the order closed, then they got their commission. So they enter it into CRM, the order processing team reviews the email, they validate all the order information, so you can see it just moves down the line, and then they activate the order and send the invoice for processing into their order admin system, and then it just keeps going down the line. And then over here, like, so this is just, whoops, this is just, let me see if I can go back. This is just the first version of this. So again, agree to the scope. What scope do we want here? You'll notice that we didn't have all of the data in terms of what gets entered. What is the information that needs to be entered into the system? So the next level of detail you agree to is, these are all the details I need. What order form info are we talking about? So before you can go from a lead to an opportunity, I need to have all of this information. Coming out of a demo, I need to have all this information. Every time I need to go to the next step in our process, I have to have all of this done first. And what that does is, if you go back to the very beginning, is it creates the efficiencies in your sales team to know, okay, great, I got an order, I got one, that's awesome. Did you get all the information you needed to put it into the system? No, then you really didn't get a sale yet. You have to get all this information from the prospect, and once you do, then it can go to the order processing, and eventually you'll get your commission. So again, when I talked about going through and remote selling, we always talked about, what do you need at every point in your sales process to get to the next step in the process? And then through the map, you can make it very obvious to your sales team what they have to have in their role to move the ball down the field. What do I need at this point, right? And so maybe it is this, you could say, did the customer want a demo? No. Well, we don't move to the next step until we do a demo. We don't send quotes out until we do a software demo. So if they're asking for a quote, and we haven't done a demo yet, there's no path on your sales map to get from inbound lead to a quote without a demo. And a business process makes that very obvious to the seller, to the salesperson, that I can't go to that step. And they understand that, and then they can explain that to the prospect that that's just not part of our standard process. We haven't seen that to be successful. In order to do the quoting, I need to do this. And then as a sales process, you can also start to bake in the questions to your process map, that if they hit that and say, customer refuses a demo, here are the 5 questions that you can ask that will help try to drive the customer to the demo. What are ways that you can help sell them on the demo, as opposed to trying to just let them fall out of the sales process at that point? So your sales process, once you get through the first version and the second version and the third version, it's a training tool. It's a management tool. It's a scaling tool. And it makes it very, very easy, because then back to the notes that I described of the process improvement, if you have your salespeople writing down, hey man, these are the questions that I've found to be effective, or the things that I've said to get people from wanting that quote to a demo, your sales team can start to collaborate that and then build that as a library of I'm stuck on this part of the process. How do I get to the next step? I've got to get this, but I don't know how to get this. So they can go to a mentor, they can go to a team lead, or they can share their tips and tricks, but then you can add it to this document so that the next 5 salespeople that you hire are already taking advantage of all that information, and they're not having to call the other salespeople. That information is already there and available to them. So again, it just makes it a lot easier to start with the sales process, and then to train people and do everything else. And it's also, as a leader, I like to know what we're doing, because the biggest thing is, if you start to see a salesperson struggle, you can go back. Let's go back to the process. How are you walking through this process? Talk to me about the last 5 deals you worked on. And if we're hitting the process, maybe it's not the person, maybe it's the process. Or maybe it is the person not following the process. But again, it gives you a management tool as a team lead to better understand that. So I'll open it up to questions. Sorry, I wasn't doing a very good job of looking at my chat as we went through there. So open it up to any questions. I'll try to find the chat window here. Or if Mike, if you've seen any questions there.
Andy, not so far, but I would ask you just, I mean, I've been through this same process with a large sales force. You've been through it at multiple levels. How much different was it when you were doing this with 4 salespeople than where you are today?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge when you're is planning for the future, and making sure that what you build when you're doing it for a small sales team. I mean, if your goal is to scale, right, which most companies want to grow, is that you have to understand, be willing to accept what you do in the current state, and not dream of having going from 4 to 40 salespeople. That's usually the challenge, is you're starting to build a sales or a process based on what you want to be instead of what you are. But then when you build that future state, you have to build in, is this going to be something that will scale? Can I replicate this? Can I teach this? So the biggest challenge I see with the smaller teams is the willingness to accept the current state and not have that kind of, pie in the sky dream scenario of this is what it could be. Or the other side is having the narrow vision of saying, what we're doing today with 4 people is going to work when we get to 40. Is this a sustainable model? In challenging people to ask that question, is this sustainable or is it scalable? And have that question asked. And maybe the answer to that question, Mike, and that's another difficult thing for people to wrap their mind around, is we know that this isn't scalable, but we know this is effective as of today, and we know it's going to have to change. And but now that you know that, right? Now that you know that that's potentially going to be a problem in the future, that's better than having to find out the hard way through results that it's not scaling, right? So I think those are the biggest challenges I see, is people either wanting to be bigger than they are and planning, and it's not really a pure representation of what they're doing, as opposed to, that it's always that unwillingness to map the current state versus the vision, right?
So let me ask you one more question. So for those who are on this phone call that are a single salesperson, or 2, the founder owner and the one salesperson they hired, Talk to me about how you'd handle that.
Yeah, I try to sell my way out of that problem, Mike. Right? That's not a good answer though. The way I do it is the way I did it was I wrote down every step that I was doing, planning for success, and then it helped me understand. I took it from the vision of the prospect first and foremost. Am I giving the prospect a path to buying our software that is straightforward, that I can help them with? Because otherwise it was very difficult for them to understand where they were at. Once I understood that the buyer has a process and I have a process, so it wasn't even so much at the beginning when it was just me. I wanted to know how I could become more efficient because, Mike, the organizations you're talking about, they were probably like FastPath was when I first met you back in whatever year that was, 2000, when we both had full heads of hair, right, man?
2008.
Yeah, 2008. It was, my thought process was I had to do everything else, right? Jeff was doing the development, I was doing the sales and the accounting and all this other stuff. It's like I didn't have time to be inefficient with the sales, so I had to figure out how can I be the most efficient. And then once I figured that part out and said, hey, these are the things I want to get done, then the second thing I said was, how are the prospects going through this process? Is it straightforward to them? Do they actually understand? Does this make sense to them as a buyer? And that, so realizing that it's not just for you or one other person, it's hopefully for hundreds, if not thousands of other people that are going to go along for the ride on your sales process. Right? Don't think of it don't conceptualize it as, I'm only really just writing this for me. No, you're not. You're writing it for every single lead, prospect, customer that you're ever going to talk to. And hopefully that's a lot of people. Right? And so being able to conceptualize it that way really motivated me to take the time, because these are all things that usually you don't have time to do or take the time to do because you're so busy. But that was really what helped me with this. Oh, sorry, Mike. It looks like Curtis Brown from Urbandale had a question. How did I learn this? Do I do it in house now or use a consultant? Have you applied a process mapping to other business processes? So the answer to the question is, how did I learn this? Is I worked at Ernst & Young when I first got out of college, and I learned business process mapping because I was doing SAP implementations. So I was trained to do business process mapping. And then the first part of every SAP implementation, because it's such a big, SAP is enterprise software for finance, accounting, logistics, and whatnot, is that if you tried to implement software without knowing the business process, SAP is built on business process, that you were going to fail the implementation. And so I was trained to do it. And then I spent at least 2 years straight that's all I pretty much did was do business process mapping at Virginia Power and Coke and Eli Lilly and, Providence Gas and Electric and some other places where I just stood in rooms and I was the facilitator and the scribe as we went through that. So I did it as a consultant, right? And have we applied this to other business processes? Yeah, onboarding, right? As you onboard employees, it's one of the best things to do. We do it for terminating an employee. We did it for our, as we do releases, right? But basically, Curtis, we had to do this for almost everything because we go through audits. So for the software, so you can apply this to really anything is really a business as a process. So I specifically have done sales process, AP process, month-end close, really everything. So that's kind of how I did it. I don't know if that answered your question or not, Curtis, but I hope it did. Yeah, well, you said yes. That's the right answer, Curtis. I appreciate that. The other question here is, do I convey to the customer what our sales process looks like when? I typically have that conversation where our salespeople do straight away, where we talk about what journey they're going to go on, because the more you can involve them into that life cycle. I mean, we don't, when you say share, it's not like we're sending a PDF of, hey, this is what our sales process looks like. But at a high level, like if and I'm sorry, I don't know what the T stands for in your name, man, but the answer, Trey. So Trey, if you were one of our prospects, what I would say is, Well, we appreciate your interest. Typically what we like to do is really identify what your challenges are as an organization, which is usually about a 15, 30-minute discovery call with your team, whoever you think makes sense, or we can even do that today if it makes sense. Then typically what we'll do after that is make sure that we put it together a solution demo. So first we'll have the discovery call, then we're going to do a solution demo where you'll see your data in our software. You'll be able to share that with the team. Coming out of that, we'll answer any questions. If we need to engage more people, we kind of iterate through that process as necessary, as more people need to see it. And then at that point, what we can do is come up with a quote. So once we understand what your problems are, then we can understand what pieces of our software would be applicable to you. We can start to understand what the quote would look like. Once we understand what the solution and the quote looks like, we can start to talk about what the implementation and what that end would look like. Then we do the T's and C's, and then you're on your way. So typically that's the process we like to go through. It can vary based on certain things. Because Trey, part of it is we have a lot of customers that have been, we've been in business as of last week. We had our 16th birthday. We have a lot of customers that are repeat customers at other organizations. So they have to they can skip over because they've used the product before, or they have to get other team members who have no idea what FastPath is. They need to engage them. But I typically try to share that straight away. And the other thing that's great about that, Trey, is you can ask them, what's your purchasing process? What does that look like? Because if I showed you my process, I show you mine, you're going to show me yours, kind of a thing. I'll try to keep it PG today. But the idea is that you can say, so talk to me about your purchasing process. How does it work on your side typically? And that can save you a lot of time as a seller, because it can also kind of uncover some things of, are they a serious buyer? They don't really do you guys release RFPs? Do you guys have a committee? How does this go? Is it just you? Because you can then start to follow up. Well, typically we have to have a committee. Well, who's on that committee? Well, we haven't formed a committee yet. Well, I just pushed you back into, this sale isn't going to close in weeks. It's probably going to close in months if you haven't even gone to a committee yet. So that would be a good way for you to go through and get their process. Jeff, any suggested resources to learn more about business process mapping training? I'll share some resources with Mike, and then Mike Caldwell can send those out. There's tons of websites. There's like a whole certification that you can get in business process mapping. The one thing I would say to you, Jeff, if you're trying to learn this on your own, is the best thing to do is do it. Like kind of get like, hey, I mean, it's kind of like trying to learn how to shoot a jump shot in basketball by reading a magazine. Go read it and kind of figure it out. But the best way to do it is go try it and, go through it. And again, I've offered this up to everybody. I'm not going to come and facilitate your meeting for you, Jeff. But if you have questions about stuff, feel free to ping me and I can kind of give you some hints. But the biggest thing I would say, and what I mean, do it, I challenge everybody that when I used to teach this class, or we used to do it in the class, is go map your your process of from the time you wake up in the morning until the time you get in the car to leave for work, right? Or the time you go back to your desk. And I'm talking about pre-COVID or post-COVID, not I threw on my sweatpants and threw my ball cap on. That's probably too short of a process these days. Go back to the old days of when you'd have to get ready to go into the office. But I'll also send some things along to Mike that are some good websites and other books and resources that you can read. And then you'll have the deck as well. And I'll try to dig up some of my other, they're not necessarily sales processes. Some of them have nothing to do with it, but it'll give you a better idea in terms of decisions and how the trees can really start to expand and proliferate off of a sales process.
Yeah, again, as a reminder to everyone, as we're talking about any other questions we have, I think that, first of all, I want to say thank you to Andy. And what we do each time when we do one of these is we actually have someone write up a blog about what we had, and we put a link to the video that comes from this, along with all the resources. And we'll send all of you that were on the attendee list that signed up, we'll send you an email saying, hey, the blog went live, everything's available here. So we'll be happy to do that for you. Other questions out there?
Yeah, it looks like Jason Greer offered to help too. So Mike, if you know Jason, or you might want to, Jason, if you know Mike, you might want to shoot him your information.
Yeah, please do. Please do, Jason. I appreciate that. All right. Well, Andy, again, thank you. And everybody attended, thank you as well. Andy, you once again offered to do another seminar, so I may call you back. You never know what's going to happen there.
That's mostly just a test to see if you're paying attention, Mike. Right?
Well, Andy, I'm going to let you get back to work. I know you're a busy guy. Thanks, everyone, for attending, and we'll talk to you all soon.